Santa's littlest helper travels the world. In a little village far, far to the north, Santa and his helpers were very, very busy, just like every year. They were wrapping presents, baking treats, polishing the sleighs, and grooming the reindeer. It was a hive of activity. But one of Santa's helpers had started preparing long before the others. He had finished packing his sleigh and even had enough time to build a snowman. He was, of course, Santa's littlest helper. The other helpers moaned because they still had so much to do. We've only 3 more days to go. Can't you give us a hand? They asked the littlest helper. Why should I? He teased. It's all right for some, said the other helpers. The littlest helper chuckled and then happily joined in, loading the sleighs away. Every year, they help Santa deliver presents to children and around the world, everyone except for Santa's littlest helper. He had the special job of delivering presents to all the animals. When Christmas Eve finally arrived, the littlest helper woke up very early, excited about the big journey that lay ahead. He opened the door of his cottage and looked down the hill to the village. The village was in complete darkness, except for one building where all the windows glowed with light, the hospital. The littlest helper thought something must be wrong. He put on his skis and headed down the hill. The littlest helper peered carefully into the large hospital. It was a disaster. All of Santa's helpers were lying in bed covered in red spots. It's the Christmas pox, declared the doctor. Is it contagious? Asked the chief helper. Very, replied the doctor. Uh-oh, gasped the littlest helper from his hiding place. The doctor and chief helper quickly turned around and shooed him away. They looked worried. It would be impossible for the chief helper and the littlest helper to visit all the children alone, and the doctor must stay back and look after his patients. But the littlest helper had an idea. I've got it. Let's ask the animals to help, he said to the chief helper. The animals? Said the chief helper. Of course. What a wonderful idea. But you will have to ask them, since they'll only listen to you. As soon as the animals heard what had happened, they wanted to help. And just like every year, the great journey began, but with a little difference. As Santa, chief helper, bear, fox, and all the other animals took the reins of their sleighs, they set off across the great blanket of ice in the north, past mountains, valleys, and rivers, toward the biggest cities and the smallest villages. And the littlest helper was in the lead. In one city, the buildings were so tall that the owl felt lightheaded, but she didn't let it show. Only the city mouse she was carrying on her back thought he noticed a teeny weeny tremble. In the next city stood a huge tower made completely of iron. Elk wanted to know what it was for. For absolutely nothing. It's just beautiful, said the clever fox. Just like the antlers on his head, giggled the field mouse, but luckily the elk couldn't hear him. Another city was built in the sea, and the streets were made of big and small canals instead of roads. Hopefully no one will fall in the water, said the chief helper. Have no fear, grumbled the bear. We can swim. The rabbit said nothing, and only the littlest helper saw how nervously he scratched one of his long ears with his back paw. Only once did the littlest helper get carried away with the excitement. He went under a bridge rather than flying over the top, as it ought to be done. But the chief helper didn't mind too much. Not tonight. Through the long night they flew without rest. When dawn slowly crept over the horizon, the chief helper climbed stiffly from his sleigh. He thought quietly to himself that he was a little old for such adventures. Next year he would make sure the helpers got their shots, and then maybe he could stay at home and drink apple cider. Back at home, at last, the chief helper settled into his armchair with a mug of apple cider. He thanked the littlest helper for his brilliant idea and for all his hard work. Santa's littlest helper drank hot blueberry juice, and there were as many Christmas treats as he could possibly hope to eat. Now, finally, it was time for the animals to receive their presents. Everyone had a wonderful time, and only the badger missed out. He was so tired he fell asleep before the presents were unwrapped. Unfortunately, back in the hospital, the sick helpers got only a little soup and medicine. "At least another week in bed," said the doctor sternly. "Can't we have gingerbread?" they asked. "It's supposed to be good for you." "Not for Christmas pox," said the doctor, and he would know. They grumbled a bit, but they comforted themselves with the thought of New Year's punch. And the children? They were overjoyed with their presents and didn't even notice the unusual helpers on Christmas Eve. Only one little boy named Jack had woken up and secretly peeped out of his window. Since then he has tried to tell his friends that Santa Claus looks a little bit like an elk, but of course no one believes him. The end.